A single mother was forced to set her baby's milk aside. What followed left an entire community reeling. No one really saw her at first. Under the harsh glare of the Mega Mart's fluorescent lights, Eleanor Vance gripped a battered old wallet with damp, shaking hands. At 27, she felt as if the whole world had been piled onto her back, and that she was carrying it alone. Her daughter Daisy needed a specific hypoallergenic formula, the kind the doctor insisted on. The kind Eleanor could hardly ever afford. As the cashier read out the total, her stomach dropped.
I'm sorry.
I have to put this one back. With eyes burning, she slid the can of formula across the counter, whispering an apology no mother should ever have to make. Behind her, carts rattled and customers shifted, the low murmur of impatience rising around her. Eleanor didn't realize someone was watching, a man whose next decision would change not only her evening, but the rest of her life. One can of formula stood between a promise and surrender. She had memorized the price down to the last cent even before the barcode beeped. Knowing and accepting though were different battles, and today she was losing. The Mega Mart's giant lights hummed a faint, indifferent buzz over the endless aisles. To Eleanor, it was the soundtrack of her mounting panic. Daisy was almost a year old. A tiny miracle with a button nose and eyes the color of summer sky. She was Eleanor's single unshakable light, the reason for every sacrifice, every late shift, every quiet prayer. But that afternoon, even Daisy's smile couldn't cut through the heavy fog of worry. Her cart held only bare essentials. Store-brand bread, a small tub of oatmeal, a bag of frozen vegetables, 2 jars of baby food. And the formula. A big blue can, the only brand that didn't leave Daisy screaming in pain. Every week it felt like a guilty indulgence. One Eleanor promised herself she would always make work somehow. She would eat less. She would work more. Whatever it took. The cashier, a bored young man with a name tag that read Kevin, began to scan. Beep. Bread. Beep. Oatmeal. Beep. Vegetables. With each chirp, the digits on the tiny screen climbed. Eleanor's palms grew slick on the cart handle. Her thumb pressed into the cracked leather of her great-grandfather's wallet in her pocket, as if it might somehow stretch further. Inside there were a few wrinkled bills and some loose change. It was all she had until her next paycheck. "Will that be all for you today?" Kevin asked, tone flat. Eleanor nodded. Her throat had gone dry. He lifted the formula. The scanner beeped again, somehow sounding harsher, more final. "That's $31.42, he announced. Her breath snagged. She had counted the money 3 times before leaving her small apartment. She'd known she was short. She had still hoped for a sale, an unexpired coupon, some tiny miracle. But miracles, she had long believed, were for other people. Hot shame flooded her. Behind her someone sighed. A cart bumped the back of her ankles. I'm sorry," she managed, barely above a whisper. "I have to put something back." Kevin only waited, fingers hovering over his keyboard. This was routine for him, the quiet apology, fumbling hands, averted eyes. An old familiar scene. Eleanor's hand shook as she reached for the formula. The metal felt heavier than it should, as if it were filled with something far denser than powdered milk. A sharp, physical ache clenched her chest. In that ordinary moment beneath those uncaring lights, Eleanor felt like the worst mother in the world. "This one," she said, voice cracking as she nudged the can toward Kevin. "I need to put this one back." She kept her eyes down. She couldn't stand the thought of pity in anyone's face. Her fingers fumbled clumsily with her wallet. She could feel the stares, the quiet judgment, the curiosity. She wished the spotless linoleum would split and swallow her whole. A few yards away, pretending to study a display of organic juice, stood James Caldwell. To a casual glance, he was just a man in a well-cut gray coat. Late 30s, thoughtful eyes, a quiet air of authority. In truth, he was a giant of the tech world, a billionaire whose innovations sat on desks and in pockets across the globe. His face occasionally appeared in business magazines, a fact he disliked and tried to avoid. His 5-year-old daughter, Sophia, clutched his hand. She had his serious eyes and a mop of curly brown hair. She was the axis his life turned on, the warm, small center of a world otherwise filled with power, pressure, and a deep, gnawing loneliness. They were at the store for a trivial reason. Sophia had decided that only one specific brand of organic apple juice would do, and this store was the only place that carried it. James's assistant could have arranged a delivery with one text. But Sophia had looked up at him and said, "I want to go with you, Daddy." James, a man who could bend markets but never resist his daughter's requests, had brought her himself. He had been watching Eleanor for a few minutes now. Quietly from the sidelines, he had seen the tremor in her hands, the flush of shame when the total flashed on the screen. His philanthropy had exposed him to plenty of statistics about poverty. He wrote enormous checks to fight it, sat on boards, attended galas. But poverty had always been numbers, line items, charts. He had never stood 3 aisles away and watched it happen to someone in real time. When he saw her slide the formula away, something stirred in him. A deep ache that was more than pity. A sharp, startling compassion. "Daddy," Sophia whispered, tugging his coat sleeve. "Why does that lady look so sad?" He looked down at his daughter's open face. How could he explain that some mothers had to choose between their own hunger and their child's? That some families lived so close to the edge a single grocery trip could break them? "She's just having a hard day, sweetheart," he said quietly. He watched Eleanor finish the transaction. Her shoulders hunched as though under a great weight. She took a single plastic bag, head bowed, and walked toward the exit like a shadow trying to pass unseen. In that instant, James Caldwell, who could buy almost anything, made a decision. He was not going to let her vanish into the night with that burden pressing down on her back. He didn't know why exactly. He only knew, with a certainty that settled into his bones, that he had to act. He knelt to Sophia's height. "Sweetheart, I need you to wait right here with Mr. Henderson for a minute, okay?" he said, nodding toward the security guard by the entrance. The guard, a kind-faced man who, unbeknownst to most, was quietly on James's private payroll for situations like this, gave a slight nod. Sophia trusted Mr. Henderson, so she agreed without fuss. James turned and walked back toward the checkout with a clear purpose. He retrieved the can of formula Eleanor had left behind. From nearby displays he added a warm rotisserie chicken, a bag of apples, a loaf of good bread, and a box of Sophia's favorite cookies. He paid in cash and stepped into the chilly evening. He scanned the expanse of the bright parking lot for the slight young woman whose shame had settled in his chest like a stone. He spotted her at the bus stop at the far edge of the lot, sitting on a cold metal bench, a single grocery bag at her feet. She was staring into the distance, expression hollow. Against the dark stretch of asphalt, she looked incredibly small. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Excuse me," he said, voice softer than he intended. Eleanor jumped. She looked up, startled at the tall, well-dressed man holding 2 grocery bags. For a panicked moment, she thought she'd done something wrong and the store had sent someone after her. "I think you might have forgotten this," James said gently, offering her the bag with the formula. Eleanor stared at the can, then at him. Embarrassment flared hot across her cheeks. "I didn't forget it," she said quietly, but with a stubborn edge. "I couldn't afford it." "I know," James replied, voice kind. "That's why I bought it for you." Silence fell. She searched his face. There was concern there, but not pity. Just a steady human understanding. "I can't take that," she whispered at last, pride stiffening her spine. It was the one thing she could still hold on to. "Please," James said earnestly. "It's just some formula. Your daughter should have it." He glanced at the small pink diaper bag at her feet. "You have a little one, right?" Eleanor swallowed, nodding. "Her name is Daisy." "That's a beautiful name," he said, a small genuine smile lighting his features. "My daughter's Sophia. She's 5. He extended the bag again. "Think of it as a gift from one parent to another." Eleanor hesitated. Pride warred with the fierce instinct to protect her child. Daisy needed this. In the end, it wasn't a decision at all. With tears blurring her vision, she reached out and took the bag. "Thank you," she breathed, voice thick. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," James said. He glanced at the darkening sky. "But it's cold and that bus might be a while. I'd be happy to give you a ride home. My car's right over there." He gestured toward a sleek dark gray car parked nearby, a driver standing by its side. Understated but obviously expensive. The formula had been one shock. A ride in a car that probably cost more than she'd earn in years was something else entirely. "Oh no, I couldn't," she protested. "The bus should be here soon." "Really, I insist," James replied, still gentle but firm. "It's getting dark and it's no trouble. Let me help you with your bag." Before she could argue, he bent to pick up her other groceries. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending a surprising warmth up her arm. For the first time she truly looked at him. Past the expensive coat and practiced composure, she saw the faint exhaustion around his eyes, and beneath his kindness, a deep sadness he couldn't quite mask. He wasn't just a rich man playing Samaritan. There was more to him than that, though she couldn't name it. Feeling as if she'd stepped into a strange dream, she let him lead her toward the car. The driver, impassive and professional, opened the back door. Inside, the car was another world, silent, warm, scented with polished leather and something clean and subtle, comforting and intimidating. James came back with Sophia, who climbed in and studied Eleanor with shy curiosity. "Sophia, this is Ms. Vance," James said. "She and her daughter are going to ride with us." "Hello," Sophia murmured, soft and timid. "Hi, Sophia." Eleanor smiled, the first real one that day. "It's very nice to meet you." The drive to Eleanor's apartment passed mostly in quiet, but not an uncomfortable one. James asked for her address. She gave it, flushing as she imagined him seeing the rundown building in a neighborhood he'd likely never visited. If he judged it, he didn't show it. He simply relayed the address to his driver, then kept Sophia entertained with a gentle game of I Spy. Eleanor watched them. The love between father and daughter was obvious and beautiful. Yet in his eyes she still recognized that same loneliness that dogged her own steps every day. When the car finally pulled up in front of her building, a plain, aging brick structure with cracked steps and peeling paint, James insisted on carrying her bags anyway. "You've already done so much," she tried weakly. "I can take it from here." "I'm sure you can," he said with a small smile. "But I'd still like to help." His mixed gentleness and quiet authority made arguing feel pointless. He followed her up 2 flights of dimly lit stairs, the hallway smelling of old carpet and overlapping cooking smells, a far cry from the silence of his car. At the end of the hall, she fished out her keys, painfully aware of the chipped paint and worn welcome mat. Her hand still shook as she turned the lock. The door opened on a cramped but spotless living room. From a playpen in the corner, a happy gurgle sounded. Daisy pushed herself up, her tiny face breaking into pure delight when she saw her mother. "Mama," she babbled. Eleanor's heart swelled. The shame and humiliation of the supermarket, the bus stop, the car melted away for a moment. She scooped Daisy up and buried her face in the baby's soft hair. Home. Safe. This was what mattered. "This is Daisy," Eleanor said softly, turning toward the doorway. James was watching with an expression she couldn't immediately read, something between wonder and longing. "She's perfect," he said, smiling in a way that transformed his whole face. His gaze drifted around the small apartment. It was sparse, the furniture mismatched, but everything gleamed. Simple framed photos lined a small shelf beside a stack of borrowed children's books. What he saw was not deprivation but care. Not clutter but pride. Standing there in a stranger's modest apartment, James felt a sense of genuine human connection he hadn't experienced in years. He knew this was more than a fleeting good deed. Something in him insisted this was the beginning of something. He handed her the bags. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Eleanor," he said, using her first name now. "Thank you again," she replied, voice full of a gratitude so clear it moved him more than any speech ever had. "You have no idea what this meant to me tonight." "I think I do," he said quietly, meeting her eyes. For a heartbeat something passed between them. Wordless understanding. A bridge between 2 very different worlds. Then he left, descending the dim staircase and stepping back into the cold night. As his car pulled away from the curb, a strange, unfamiliar feeling spread through his chest. Hope. He didn't know it yet, but that night in a grocery store, that single can of formula was not an ending. It was the first step in a story that would reshape both their lives in ways neither could imagine. In the days after the Mega Mart encounter, something inside Eleanor shifted. The heavy gray fog of despair that had hung over her for months lifted just enough to let in a sliver of light. The warmth she felt had less to do with the groceries on her counter, and more to do with the simple fact that someone had actually seen her. In a life where she'd been treated as invisible, just another tired waitress, another poor single mother, a stranger had looked at her and seen a person. A mother. Someone worth a moment of kindness. That night, after Daisy fell asleep, Eleanor sat alone in her small living room. The can of formula on the counter looked almost unreal, a physical reminder of a night that felt like a dream. She wrapped her hands around a mug of tea and replayed everything. His name was James. His daughter's was Sophia. That was all she knew. She assumed she'd never see him again. He was a brief, bright flare against a dark horizon, a ship passing in the night. Yet his generosity had done more than fill Daisy's bottles for a few weeks. It had nudged something awake in Eleanor, a fragile ember of hope she'd thought had long since gone cold. For months her life had been survival on repeat. Wake up, dress Daisy, drop her at the sitters, work 8 grinding hours at the diner, pick Daisy up, cook, clean, collapse, repeat. The pay barely covered rent and groceries. There was never extra. No room for plans beyond get through today. But a new thought began to cautiously take root. She and Daisy deserved more. On her bookshelf sat a photograph of her great-grandfather, Sergeant Michael Vance in uniform, the family hero, a man whose bravery in a long-ago war had been the subject of bedtime stories throughout her childhood. His eyes in the photo blazed with resolve. What would he think of her now, scraping by, too tired and afraid to even dream? The next morning she woke with a new kind of determination. She made Daisy breakfast with deliberate, focused movements. While Daisy napped, instead of numbing herself with TV, Eleanor sat at her wobbly kitchen table with a pen and a blank sheet of paper. She began to list her skills. Hard worker. Reliable. Good with people. Before Daisy, she'd been a receptionist at a small law firm. She'd done well, organized, efficient, but the salary hadn't covered childcare, and she'd been forced to leave. She spread out the local paper, circling classified ads. Then she went online, using the shaky cafe Wi-Fi that reached her apartment. Most postings required degrees she didn't have, or experience she couldn't claim. Discouragement crept in. She pushed it back. Not today. An ad caught her eye. Administrative assistant, Veterans Community Center. The pay was slightly better, the hours more predictable. More than that, though, the mission spoke to her. Supporting veterans and their families felt like something Sergeant Michael Vance would have approved of. She drew a deep breath and for the first time in over 2 years, started to put together a resume. Across town in a glass-walled mansion overlooking the city, James Caldwell was also unable to move on from that night. His life was a carefully controlled landscape of boardrooms, negotiations, and astronomical numbers. He had more than he could ever spend, and yet he lived with a profound emptiness. His wife, Isabella, had died 3 years earlier. No amount of success had filled the space she left behind. Sophia kept him anchored, his most important reason to wake up each day, but the hands-on work of raising her largely fell to nannies and housekeepers. In his own home, he often felt more like an executive than a father. The image of Eleanor at the checkout haunted him. The tremble of her hands, the mortified tilt of her shoulders, the unshakable love for her child that seemed to radiate from her. He had felt more alive in the 10 minutes standing in that shabby hallway outside her apartment than he had through years of sleek conference rooms and glittering charity balls. He found his thoughts returning to her constantly. On an international conference call, he stared out his floor-to-ceiling window and wondered whether she'd found a better job. While reviewing forecasts, he would suddenly see Daisy's bright face, hear Sophia's shy hello. He felt an insistent pull, an almost irrational need to know she and Daisy were okay. He was not a man who got personally involved. He was used to solving problems with logic and money, wire transfers, grants, endowments. He funded causes, not individuals. But Eleanor didn't feel like a cause. Somehow, in that brief encounter, she had stopped being a stranger. He wanted to help, but not in the crude, obvious way. He had seen the pride in her eyes. The last thing he would do was hand her a check that made her feel small. So, for once, he used his resources for something personal. He called in his head of security, David, a steady former FBI agent he trusted completely, and asked him to quietly find basic information on Eleanor Vance. No deep digging, just enough to answer the one question gnawing at him. Were she and Daisy safe? He told himself he was tying up a loose end. He knew better. A day later, David slid a thin manila folder onto his desk. "Here's what you asked for on Ms. Eleanor Vance, sir," he said evenly. James opened it with a strange knot in his stomach. Address. Employment history. Clean record. Ordinary details. Then he saw the line about her family, great-granddaughter of Sergeant Michael Vance. James froze. He knew that name. His own grandfather, Corporal Thomas Caldwell, had served with a Sergeant Michael Vance. James had grown up hearing that name in stories told with awe and reverence. Michael Vance, the man who had single-handedly saved their platoon in a brutal, nearly forgotten battle. Thomas Caldwell often said he owed every year of his life to that sergeant. James leaned back, mind spinning. This couldn't be coincidence. Not really. It felt like a thread tossed across time, tying one family to another. His grandfather had carried a sense of unpayable debt to Michael Vance until the day he died. And now, decades later, James had randomly stepped in to help that hero's great-granddaughter at a Mega Mart checkout. His vague intention to do something solidified into resolve. This was no longer a simple act of generosity. It was about legacy, about honor, about finally repaying in some small way the debt his grandfather had carried. But how? He couldn't simply arrive at her door with money. That would cheapen everything. He needed to offer something that lifted her up without diminishing her. He canceled his afternoon meetings and ignored his buzzing phone. He stood by his office window, the city spread beneath him, and thought about his grandfather. About Isabella. About Sophia. About the kind of man he wanted his daughter to believe he was. Not just a name on a building, but someone who understood that real legacy was built out of people's lives. By sunset he had a plan. It was unconventional, risky, but it felt right. He called David back in. "David," he said, voice calm and decisive, "I need you to arrange a meeting." A week later, Eleanor's phone rang. "Ms. Vance? This is the Veterans Community Center. We received your application for the administrative assistant position, and we'd love to invite you for an interview." Her heart leapt. For 2 days she prepared. She ironed her only presentable blouse. She reviewed her resume until she could recite it. She begged her elderly neighbor to watch Daisy for an hour. The community center was modest but welcoming, its walls lined with photographs of local servicemen and women. Eleanor sat down opposite the director, a warm-eyed woman named Mrs. Gable. The interview felt good. Eleanor spoke about her great-grandfather, her respect for veterans, her desire to do meaningful work. She felt for once like more than a tired mother in an apron. At the end, Mrs. Gable smiled kindly. "You're a very impressive young woman, Eleanor. Your passion for this work is obvious." Eleanor's heart swelled. "However, Mrs. Gable continued, her expression shifting, the administrative position has actually just been filled." "I'm so sorry." The words hit like a physical blow. Eleanor swallowed, forcing her face to stay neutral. "Oh, I see," she said faintly. "Thank you for your time." She started to rise. "But," Mrs. Gable held up a hand, "another opportunity has come up. It's a bit unusual." She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Our largest benefactor recently established a new program. It's called the Vance Legacy Grant." Eleanor stared. Her name, her family's name, was printed in bold at the top. "The grant," Mrs. Gable explained, "is for direct descendants of local war heroes. It provides education funding, career training, and a living stipend to help families regain footing. It's brand new. You would be the very first recipient." She glanced up, eyes kind. "It seems our benefactor was made aware of your application and your relation to Sergeant Michael Vance. He was quite insistent." Eleanor's mind spun. A grant with her family's name on it didn't feel real. Who is the benefactor?" she whispered. "He prefers to remain anonymous," Mrs. Gable replied. "He believes in honoring our heroes by investing in their families." She folded her hands. "The grant is yours, Eleanor, if you want it. It would give you a monthly stipend." More than the admin role would have paid, and cover tuition if you choose to go back to school. It's not a handout. It's a chance to build a new life for you and your daughter. Tears flooded Eleanor's eyes. She thought of her great-grandfather, of the exhausted young woman in the Mega Mart checkout line, of the stranger in the gray coat. This didn't feel like charity. It felt like a torch being passed from one generation to the next. Yes, she said, one tear spilling over. Her voice shook, but underneath it was a new steady strength. Yes, I want it. Stepping out into the afternoon sun afterward, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She didn't know who the anonymous benefactor was, but she sent a silent prayer of thanks outward anyway. She had no idea the man who had paid for her formula was the same man who had just paid for her future. What she did know was that, for the first time in a long time, the road ahead wasn't all darkness. It glowed with possibility, and she was ready to walk it. The Vance Legacy Grant was more than a deposit in her account. It was solid ground after years of feeling like she was treading water. The first thing she did was move. She found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quieter neighborhood. No luxury, but the building was safe. Sunlight streamed through its windows in the afternoon. And there was a little patch of shared grass out back where Daisy could toddle and play. For the first time since giving birth, Eleanor could truly exhale. She built a strict routine. Days were devoted to Daisy, trips to the park, story time at the library, long afternoons stacking blocks on the living room rug. Daisy, catching her mother's new lightness, blossomed. Babble became words. Staggering steps became joyful runs. At night, after Daisy was tucked into bed, another version of Eleanor emerged. She brewed strong coffee, sat at a second-hand desk, and opened her laptop. With the grant funding her tuition, she enrolled in an online business administration program at the community college. The coursework was hard. Her brain often buzzed with exhaustion after long days with a toddler. But as she wrestled with spreadsheets and management chapters, she felt something thrilling. Purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building. She often thought about the anonymous benefactor. In her imagination, he was an older man, perhaps a veteran himself, trying to do one final good thing with his wealth. She wrote him a letter, pages of careful thanks, and gave it to Mrs. Gable to pass along. She wanted him to know she was not going to waste a single chance he'd given her. She never once connected him with the kind-eyed stranger from Mega Mart. That memory lived in its own small sacred corner of her heart. 3 months after the grant began, her phone rang again. "Eleanor, dear, I have a little favor to ask," came Mrs. Gable's warm, coaxing voice. "We're hosting a reception next Friday to officially launch the Vance Legacy Grant and thank the donors who made it possible. As our first recipient, it would mean the world if you could attend, and perhaps say a few words about what it's meant to you and Daisy." Public speaking. Eleanor's stomach knotted. "Oh, I don't know," she faltered. "I'm terrible at that sort of thing. I'd have no idea what to say." "Just speak from the heart," Mrs. Gable urged. "You are living proof of why this program matters. And our main benefactor will be there. He's a very private man, but he's making a rare appearance. I know your story would move him. That changed everything. This might be her only chance to say thank you face to face." The thought scared her, but she couldn't refuse. "Okay," she said, taking a breath. "I'll be there." The week leading up to the event was white noise and nerves. She drafted and redrafted a short speech until all the versions blurred together. She worried endlessly about what to wear, finally settling on a simple dark blue dress from a clearance rack, the first new clothing she'd bought for herself in years. On the night of the reception, she left a chatty Daisy with a kindly neighbor and coaxed her sputtering old car across town. The community center's main hall was decorated simply: white tablecloths, small vases of flowers. Local leaders, veterans, and their families mingled in loose clusters. Eleanor felt like an imposter. She clutched her small purse, scanning for a friendly face. Then she saw him. Across the room, in a perfectly tailored dark suit, speaking to a city councilman. The same thoughtful expression. The same calm presence she remembered from the bus stop and her doorway. James. Her heart gave a wild, startled jolt, half shock, half something else she didn't dare name. What was he doing here? Was he a donor? A guest? A patron of the center? He must have felt her gaze. He turned, his eyes locking onto hers. Recognition flickered there, followed by a gentle, unmistakable smile. For a heartbeat, the room faded around them. He excused himself from his conversation and walked toward her. With each step, pieces slid into place in Eleanor's mind. A private benefactor. A rare public appearance. A program named Vance. It couldn't be. It was too storybook. "Eleanor," he said when he reached her, voice as kind as she remembered. "It's really good to see you again." "James," she breathed. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his smile deepening. "Although I think I might know." Before she could respond, Mrs. Gable bustled up, beaming. "Oh, I see you two have met," she said. "Eleanor, this is Mr. James Caldwell, the man I told you about. The one we all have to thank for the Vance Legacy grant." The world tilted. Eleanor stared at him, words gone. The man who had paid for a can of formula was the same man who had quietly given her a future. "You," she whispered. His expression softened as he read the storm of emotion on her face. Shock, confusion, gratitude. "Maybe we could step outside for a minute," he suggested gently. "It's a bit loud in here." He led her through a side door onto a small patio. Cool air washed over them, quieting the hum of the reception inside. "I don't understand," Eleanor said, voice trembling. "Why? Why would you do all of this?" James leaned against the brick wall, hands in his pockets. He looked up at the stars for a moment before meeting her gaze. "It's complicated," he said. "But it started a long time ago. Before we were born." He told her. About his grandfather, Corporal Thomas Caldwell. About the war. About Sergeant Michael Vance and the day he had saved an entire platoon from being wiped out. "My grandfather never forgot that day," James said, his voice roughening. "He spent his life feeling he owed a debt he could never repay. He raised me to believe we honor the people who came before us by carrying their legacy forward." He shrugged slightly. "When I saw you in that store, I didn't know who you were. I just saw a mother trying to do right by her child. Later, when I learned you were Sergeant Vance's great-granddaughter, I knew it wasn't just chance. It felt like a chance to finally honor what my family owes yours." Eleanor listened, transfixed. Any lingering sense of shame or obligation dissolved beneath the weight of the story. This wasn't charity. It was a promise kept across decades. "All my life I've heard about him," she whispered, eyes shining. "He's always been this legend. Just a picture on a shelf." Her voice broke slightly. "You've made him real to me. Thank you. You're the one building the legacy now," James said, sincerity clear. "You're taking this opportunity and turning it into something solid for you and Daisy. That's the greatest way you could honor him." Silence settled between them. Not awkward but full. For the first time, Eleanor didn't feel intimidated by his wealth or power. She saw the grandson of a soldier trying to do right. And he no longer saw a recipient. He saw the great-granddaughter of the man who had saved his own grandfather's life. Strong, dignified, resilient. Their moment cracked as a sharp, polished voice cut through the air. "James, there you are. I've been looking everywhere." A woman appeared in the doorway. Tall and elegant, she wore a designer suit that probably cost more than Eleanor's annual rent. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her smile bright and brittle. Her eyes, however, were cool and appraising. "Penelope," James said, his smile shifting into something more formal. "I was just getting some air. This is Eleanor Vance." "Eleanor, this is Penelope Covington, from the Center's Board of Directors." Penelope's gaze swept over Eleanor from head to toe, plain dress, scuffed shoes, before flicking away. "Vance?" she repeated, as if testing the name. "Oh, you're the recipient. How lovely." The word recipient carried a faint, poisonous sweetness. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Eleanor said politely, extending a hand. Penelope ignored it, already turning back to James. "They're about to start the speeches, darling, and you promised to sit at my table." She slipped her arm through his in a possessive gesture. James looked momentarily trapped, then gently freed his arm. "I'll be in shortly, Penelope. I need to finish speaking with Eleanor." Her smile tightened, then smoothed again. "Of course. Don't be long." She gave Eleanor one lingering, dismissive look, a warning more than a greeting, then glided back inside. The air, once warm with connection, felt colder. Eleanor suddenly felt painfully out of place again. "I'm sorry about that," James said quietly. "It's fine," she lied. "I should go in anyway. I think I'm supposed to give a speech." The thought made her stomach twist. "You'll do great," he said, his confidence in her unwavering. "Just speak from the heart. That's all anyone needs." He was right. Minutes later, standing at the podium, looking out at the expectant faces, Eleanor's carefully prepared speech vanished from her mind. All that remained was the truth. She spoke as a mother. Her voice was soft but steady as she talked about the crushing pressure of providing alone, the shame of that night at the Mega Mart, the impossible choice between a baby's needs and an empty wallet. She spoke of her great-grandfather not as a distant hero, but as the man whose courage she tried to echo in small, ordinary ways each day. "This grant," she said, searching out James's face in the crowd and finding his steady gaze, "is more than financial help. It's a message." Her voice strengthened. "It says we see you. It says the sacrifices our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents made are not forgotten. That their legacy is not just statues and plaques. It's in the chances we're given to build new lives." She ended simply. "Thank you for giving my daughter a future. And thank you for giving me back my hope." When she stepped away, the room was silent for a heartbeat, then filled with warm, sincere applause. Several older veterans wiped at their eyes. As Eleanor made her way back to her seat on shaky legs, people reached out to squeeze her hand to thank her. For the first time, she didn't feel like a guest. She felt like she belonged. James was waiting, his eyes bright with something that looked very much like pride. "I told you you'd be wonderful," he murmured. Across the room, Penelope Covington watched, lips pressed into a hard line. She saw the way James looked at Eleanor, with warmth and admiration he had never shown her. She saw community leaders listening to Eleanor with respect. In Penelope's carefully curated world, where status and money defined worth, Eleanor Vance was an unforgivable anomaly. And Penelope was not the kind of woman who tolerated disruptions. In the weeks that followed, her response was quiet but deadly. She never attacked Eleanor openly. Her methods were far more refined. At board meetings, she would sigh and say, "I'm just a bit concerned about oversight on this new Vance grant. It's a substantial sum for a single individual, based on what appears to be a personal recommendation." In hallway conversations, her tone would drop to a confidential murmur. "It's a lovely story, of course, but we must protect the center's reputation. We wouldn't want anyone thinking donations are being used for our benefactors' personal acquaintances." The implication was clear. Eleanor was not a deserving candidate, but a poor, pretty woman enjoying the questionable attentions of a lonely billionaire. James, blinded by grief and affection, was redirecting charitable funds for her sake. The rumor was cruel, false, and poisonous. Mrs. Gable, fiercely protective of both Eleanor and the grant, did her best to stamp out the whispers, but Penelope wielded influence like a weapon. The doubt spread. At last, with no other choice, Mrs. Gable called a formal board meeting to review the allocation process and future of the Vance Legacy Grant. The day before, she phoned Eleanor, her voice heavy. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," she said. "Penelope Covington is challenging the integrity of the program. She's pushing to have the grant suspended, pending a review. I'm afraid she may succeed." Cold dread washed through Eleanor. Everything she'd painstakingly begun to build seemed to wobble. Humiliation struck almost as hard. To be seen again as a charity case, a suspect beneficiary, was like being stripped bare. But then another emotion rose to meet the fear. Anger. This wasn't only about her. Penelope was smearing her great-grandfather's name. Attacking a program meant to help countless veterans' families. The Eleanor of a few months ago might have crumbled. This Eleanor would not. "When is the meeting?" she asked, voice steady. The next afternoon, Eleanor walked into the community center boardroom. Every head turned. Penelope sat at the head of the long table, eyebrows lifting in annoyed surprise at Eleanor's presence. James sat near the far end, his jaw set. The meeting began. In smooth, practiced tones, Penelope spoke of fiduciary duty, donor confidence, and transparent processes. She never once said Eleanor's name. Everyone knew whom she meant. All I'm suggesting, she concluded piously, is that we pause this particular initiative until a more rigorous and impartial selection committee can be formed. It's simply good governance. An uncomfortable silence fell. Several board members shifted in their chairs, clearly torn. Before anyone could speak, Eleanor stood. My name is Eleanor Vance, she said clearly. I am the single individual, and the personal friend Mrs. Covington has been referring to. She turned to Penelope, meeting her eyes. You talk about governance and process, she said, voice calm but edged with steel. But what you're really doing is punishing me because you think I don't belong here. You see a poor single mother and decide I can't be worthy of this opportunity. You see a charity case, not a person. She turned to the rest of the board. This grant is not just about me. It's for every family who has sacrificed. For every child whose parent or grandparent served this country. Suspending it, burying it under reviews and committees because one person dislikes its first recipient, would be an insult to all of them. Penelope gave a delicate, dismissive snort. This is all very emotional, Miss Vance, she said coolly. But it doesn't change the facts. You had a pre-existing personal relationship with our primary benefactor. The optics are, to put it kindly, unfortunate. You're right, said a deep voice at the far end. James rose. Our families do have a pre-existing relationship, he said. It goes back more than 70 years. He walked to the head of the table and set a worn leather-bound journal down, opening it to a marked page. This was my grandfather's journal, he said. Corporal Thomas Caldwell. In it, he describes the day his life was saved by a sergeant named Michael Vance. He ran a finger under the faded words. He was the bravest man I ever knew, James read aloud. I owe him my life. A debt I can never repay. He laid several old photographs on the glossy tabletop, a grainy shot of young soldiers, his grandfather and Sergeant Vance standing shoulder to shoulder, copies of military commendations describing Michael Vance's heroism. The Vance Legacy Grant is not some impulsive gesture, James said, his voice ringing with conviction. It is the long overdue payment of a debt of honor from the Caldwell family to the Vance family. He looked straight at Penelope. Eleanor Vance is not the object of my pity. She is the heir to a legacy of courage my family has a duty to acknowledge. To suggest otherwise, to imply this is anything less than what it is to dishonor the memory of both these men. Silence fell over the room like a blanket. Penelope's face had gone pale. Her careful narrative crumbled in the face of tangible history and simple truth. Where she had wielded insinuation, James had answered with facts and honor. There was nothing left for her to say. The board voted unanimously, not only to continue the Vance Legacy Grant, but to work with James's foundation to expand it into a permanent pillar of the community center's mission. A week later, Penelope Covington resigned quietly from the board. 2 years slipped by. The world kept turning, but everything in Eleanor's life looked different. She completed her business administration degree, graduating at the top of her class. True to his word, James hired her at the Caldwell family's philanthropic foundation. Her main responsibility: managing and growing the program she had once been its only recipient of. The Vance Legacy Grant had since helped more than a dozen veterans' families find their footing, covering education, training, and living costs while they rebuilt their lives. On a bright Saturday afternoon, Eleanor and James sat on a blanket in a sunlit park. A little way off, 7-year-old Sophia and 3-year-old Daisy chased each other through the grass, their laughter ringing through the air. They looked to anyone passing by like sisters. Eleanor leaned her head against James's shoulder in a gesture that had become easy and natural. Their relationship had grown slowly, not out of dramatic declarations but from long conversations, shared purpose, and quiet understanding. He had become her partner, her confidant, her family. You know, Eleanor said, watching Daisy chase a butterfly, I still think about that woman at the grocery store. The one who was so scared and lost. James slipped his arm around her, pulling her just a little closer. I think about her too, he said softly. And I think about the man who was so lonely he'd almost forgotten what real connection felt like. He looked from the girls' bright, laughing faces to the woman beside him, sure-eyed, peaceful. You didn't just build a new life for yourself, Eleanor, he added. You built one for me too. You reminded me what legacy really means. It's not the money you leave behind. It's the lives you touch. She turned and smiled at him, a smile full of a love as steady and true as the legacy their grandfathers had forged decades before. The road that had brought them here had been rough, full of hardship and grace. But in the warmth of that afternoon, with their daughter's laughter in the air and the world spread out before them, it was hard to imagine being anywhere else. It had all begun with a simple act of kindness in a grocery store. A single moment that proved a debt of honor never truly expires, and that the quietest acts of love can echo across generations. That's where we'll leave this story for now. Whenever I share one of these, my hope is that it lets you step outside the everyday for a little while and just drift. I'd be curious to know what you were doing while listening or reading. Unwinding after work, driving late at night, getting ready to sleep. If you feel like sharing, drop a note in the comments. I do read them. And if you'd like to be sure our paths cross again, hitting like and subscribing helps more than you might think. Thanks for spending this time with me.